Hello and welcome to the Stories of Northern Life, a podcast brought to you by the Sault Ste. Marie Museum, sharing the heritage of Northern Ontario and the culturally rich stories in everyday life. We bring the events and people of the Sioux's past to a new light and capture the stories of changemakers in our northern community today. How did we get our news? I'm going to start with a paper I didn't know existed until just a few days ago, and it was called The Peace Pipe. It was an Ojibwe newspaper published monthly at the Shingwak home. It was edited by Reverend E.F. Wilson, founder and the first principal of Shingwak. It was published in English and Ojibwe and ran from October 1878 to September 1879. So not very long. But Reverend Wilson also edited other monthly periodicals from Shingwak home, such as the Algoma Missionary New, Shingwak Journal, and Our Forest Children. Next, the Algoma Pioneer and District General Advertiser. It started in 1875 by William H. Carney, who was appointed sheriff of the District of Algoma by the conservative government of John A. Macdonald. And 1 year later, it was sold to Edward Biggins, who would become the mayor in 1888. The Pioneer offices were located on the west side of Pimp Street. Next up, the Northern Light. It was housed on the south side of Queen Street in what was then the Adams Block. It was also founded in 1875 by Kelly Turner and Colonel Dr. John Kelly. He was one of the founders of the jail surgeon and coroner at the time, and just had an itch for writing. A Sioux Star article describes in 1917 the stories told by the Northern Light were vacacious enough, whether true or not. These two papers, the Northern Light and Algoma Pioneer, fought neck and neck for a very long time. The papers at the time were very fulsome of personal politics, opinions, and vendettas than actual news. Adding another to the newspaper rivalry was Sioux Express. It was established in 1887 by W.D. Coe before Charles N. Smith purchased the paper in 1898. Smith was a Liberal MP and took his politics very seriously, as well as the paper's rivals that would delight in slamming one another. In the June 23rd, 1916 edition, there was an editorial written by Smith condemning the sending of Canadian boys overseas during the First World War. In result, the Express was detained at the post office, and the copies of the paper that circulated weekly were left undelivered. The premises where the Sioux Express was published had been placed under seizure for 3 months for infraction of press censorship regulations. As far as it is known, the Sioux Express was never published again. Now let's talk about the Star, formerly the Courier, and the major players with this paper. So Judge Moses McFadden was the financial banker of the Sioux Courier, owned by John H. Muir. He then purchased it himself. He renamed it to the Star in 1899. His brother, Judge Ura McFadden, was editor-in-chief and reporter and wrote scathing editorials about the liberal politicians, it is said. Both brothers were inexperienced in printing and knew nothing of typesetting. The Star only had 2 to 4 pages, and the articles would be comprised of quotes and transposed items from Toronto papers. Moses McFadden decided eventually to sell the Star to a man named James Watson Curran in 1901, after observing that there is no room for 3 local papers to feud. James Curran was an interesting fella in our history, and I'd love to go a little deeper on his story. He was born in Ireland on April 24th, 1865. When he was 8, his family immigrated to Canada, eventually settling in Orillia, Ontario. The Curran family was actually in the newspaper business, and James' father owned 2 newspapers, the Essex Chronicle and Aurelia News. In 1890, James moved to Toronto to work first as a reporter for the Toronto Empire and then as city editor. In 1895, he moved to Montreal to become the city editor for the Montreal Herald. Then 6 years later, while passing through Sault Ste. Marie, he became so inspired with the city that he quit his job at the Herald and bought his own paper. By the time 1812 rolled around, the Sault incorporated as a city, the paper mill was completed, door-to-door mail delivery was introduced, and James turned the weekly paper into a daily. Curran believed that a newspaper's first duty was to help its own town and district. Through his position at the paper, he helped garner support for the expansion of the Algoma steel plant and organized the Advisory Union, which would establish the Sault-Sudbury Highway. Although stories of the great steel plant, paper mills, and power deployments were impressive, Curran believed that his paper lacked stories to appeal to the man on the street. Readers initially had no interest, and circulation dropped 25% within the first month of this approach. But this paper proves to us that it can overcome many struggles. He tried multiple ways to gain a following. He was the first to report on town council meetings, which local politicians found to be a novelty. It wasn't until he began publishing stories about the Algoma wolves that he gained wide success, not just as a local newspaper, but the segments were soon picked up by many great Canadian and American newspapers promoting tourism to the region. At this point in time, wolves were feared and hunted as enemies of humans. Curran, on the other hand, went so far as to write a book entitled Wolves Don't Bite in defense to these animals. In his book, Curran claims the story of Little Red Riding Hood laid an unreasonable fear on countless millions of human beings. And don't get this wrong, he still hunted wolves with the Algoma Wolf Club, but without fear and lots of admiration for the creatures. I even think he had a pet wolf at some point. Anyway, his personal study of wolves in the area was one of his greatest achievements. He published an offer of $100 to anyone who could prove to his satisfaction that they had been attacked by a wolf. Responses to this offer resulted in about 80 to 90 claims, but none proven to be legitimate. The offer was never collected. Curran traveled throughout the region, giving talks on the misunderstood wolf and trying to change people's feelings about this animal, all while wearing a full-length wolf fur coat. Like I mentioned, he published the book Wolves Don't Bite in 1940, but before that he had published another, Here Was Vinland, in 1939. And both are great examples of his enthusiasm for the region. The first one, Here Was Vinland, was drawn from 26 articles which appeared in the newspaper from August 1938 to February 1939. The story sought to prove that Norsemen settled in the Great Lakes region about 1000 AD. The stories chronicled discoveries of Norse relics. And both of the books were published by the Sault Daily Star, his own paper. Alongside these publications, J.W. Curran was one of the greatest promoters of Sault Ste. Marie of his time. He did an immense amount of historical research and published many articles on the history of Sault Ste. Marie and surrounding area throughout the years. He was one of the original members of the Sault Ste. Marie Historical Society in 1920. He worked tirelessly to promote the organization and preserve our local history. He developed a number of community events. In 1922, as Rotary Club president, he organized the first community night, an event which is still around today, but better known as Rotary Fest. 8,000 people took part and 50 vehicles were decorated for the first parade on September 22nd, 1922. After the first parade, the festivities took place on the grounds of the courthouse, and there was a street dance on Queen Street. Speaking of the courthouse, he was also the person to convince Rudyard Kipling to write a poem for our cenotaph there. Kipling responded to Curran that he would be honored to do so, and the verse on the cenotaph was composed just for us here in Sault Ste. Marie. Finally, in 1932, Curran used the promotion garnered by the Wolf articles and book to organize a Wolf Week event here in the Sioux, which attracted thousands of people to the region during the darkest days in the Depression. Curran suggested that plans to be made to create a festival of events which would accomplish these goals. Have you heard of Longfellow's play Hiawatha? The local Ojibwe tribe from Garden River had performed a play on the shores of Lake Huron at Kensington Point in 1901. Curran encouraged them to receive the play during the Wolf Week. The play was so successful during that week, he worked with the group to have them perform and play at the Toronto C&E exhibition in 1937. The second was a history cabinet. At the offices at the Sioux Star, Curran kept a display cabinet which held items of historic interest brought in by local people. This became named the History Cabinet and was maintained by Curran for many years. Later, the cabinet artifacts were donated to us as the Historical Society and Sault Ste. Marie Museum. During Wolf Week, Curran erected an arch at Bellows Point that was 2 cedar poles topped with a huge howling wolf. The banner on the arch read, "Respectable strangers are welcome in this town." It is estimated that over 10,000 visitors came to enjoy the festivities of Wolf Week in 1932. Attractions included a pen in the center of town containing a pack of wolves, performances of the Hiawatha play, as I mentioned, and a mammoth barbecue for the public. It was an exciting 6-day jamboree organized by Curran, of course, plus the Board of Trade, City Council, the Rotary, Kiwanis clubs, and local businesses. So all of this was a very brief overview of some of the things for which James Watson Curran deserves a great deal of credit for promoting our city and the importance of our unique heritage. He was the editor of the Star for 50 years, and it was not until 1975 that the Curran family decided to sell the paper to Southam Press, who changed the name to the Sioux Star, which it is currently known as. Your lasting fun fact for this episode is that one of the Sioux ferries that went across from Sioux, Ontario to Sioux, Michigan was named James W. Curran. The ferry began its journey across the St. Mary's River daily in 1947. When the International Bridge opened, the boat was withdrawn from service, and it was transferred to Lake Ontario to supplement a ferry service between Kingston and Wolfe Island. Now, the name Wolfe Island comes from the surname of a British general, but I still think it's a fitting place for a ship named after James Curran, who just happened to be the animal's biggest advocate in the Americas. That's all I have for you today, and I hope you learned a little something new about Sioux newspapers, Sioux events, and a local character who made a huge impact in our community. Come back again next week for another episode of the Stories of Northern Life. Ciao for now.
Hi, I'm J.L. Fizzell, and I write and publish poetry inspired by nature and the art of being human. These are some of my words. For a while, I was really into writing short poems, nothing more than 4 to 8 lines. I really was challenging myself to see how much I could squish into those words. So this one's pretty short, and it's called After Rain. I was asked to describe how the earth smells after rain, and I'd have to tell you, that the air tastes of hope. I hope this poem took you somewhere inside yourself that you needed to go. You can listen to my story here on the Stories of Northern Life podcast. Links are in the show notes.
Have you been to your local museum lately? Visit us at the Sault Ste. Marie Museum, located in downtown Sault Ste. Marie, the one with the big clock tower on the top. Our hours of operation are 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Tuesday to Saturday. We have 3 floors of exhibits that we constantly work on updating. The whole family is welcome, as we have activity sheets and scavenger hunts with prizes for every kiddo, a discovery gallery full of hands-on learning, and more interactive elements scattered throughout the museum. And don't forget to come say hi and let us know you're a listener of the podcast.